Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Does he believe that all of his ministers have met the requirements of the Cabinet Manual to behave in a way that upholds and is seen to uphold the highest ethical standards in their ministerial capacity, their political capacity and their personal capacity? If so, why?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yes, because as far as I'm aware they have.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Does he believe that his minister, Rodney Hyde, upheld the highest ethical standards in his personal and in his political capacities when he did not disclose but covered up his law and order spokesperson's criminal act in stealing the identity of a dead child?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, firstly, I am not responsible for either the selection of candidates or the background of candidates in partners that the government has a confidence and supply agreement, nor would there be any reason for me to question the backgrounds of those members. And in no time prior to the public statement made in this House by David Garrett had I ever had a discussion with Rodney Hyde about that issue. Therefore, he could not have misled me because he did not.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Question, Mr. Speaker. What has he done to hold Mr. Hyde, his minister, accountable for his failure to meet what most New Zealanders would regard as an ethical standard, given the Cabinet Manual requirement that ministers are accountable to the Prime Minister for their actions in a personal and political capacity?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's important here to understand the difference between judgment and ethical behaviour. My responsibility... Cabinet Manual quite clearly states that I am responsible, the ministers are responsible to me for their ethical behaviour, not for their judgment.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, what does the Prime Minister have to say about accountability for good judgment and high standards to the mother of the dead baby who says that she has suffered huge stress and anxiety as a result of this criminal action, yet she still sees Mr. Hyde drawing a ministerial salary and the Prime Minister getting right in behind him and supporting him?
Order. While I've stressed today that questions to ministers can be quite wide in the wider responsibility of ministers for public affairs, that question that referred to matters relating to someone totally unconnected with Parliament, I would think would need rewording to bring it within standing orders. I don't believe the Prime Minister can be in any way responsible for, or can be answerable for how another person might feel about something. I invite the member, I don't want him to lose or something, I invite him to reword his question.
Mr. Speaker, has the Prime Minister seen reports about the distress suffered by the mother of the dead baby caused by the criminal act of stealing her child's identity and the involvement of a Member of Parliament supported by his leader who covered up that story, and how does he think that she feels about that?
Well, if the Prime Minister is happy to answer it, I'm happy for him to do so, but I stress the Prime Minister is not answerable at all for how a person outside this Parliament might feel about something. I'll hear the Honourable Darren Hughes, but...
Just a brief contribution to say that the style of questioning that the Leader of the Opposition used was identical to the one used by Rodney Hyde yesterday when he asked whether or not the Prime Minister had seen reports that related to Mr Goff. So when you listen to the wording that Mr Goff used, I think you'll find that it was in order for a question you allowed yesterday.
We don't need to take more time on a point of order like that. I invite the member to go back and have a look at the Hansard of the Honourable Rodney Hyde yesterday. It was a somewhat different situation because it referred to a report he had written to the Prime Minister himself, and the Prime Minister answered in relation to that report. Now, the first part of the Leader of the Opposition's question seemed fine. Asked had the Prime Minister seen a certain report. That's fine. But then it asked him how he felt about how he saw someone outside this Parliament, totally disconnected from this place, might feel. Now, the Prime Minister, welcome. I don't want to prevent the Prime Minister from answering a question should he wish to do so, but I can't ask the Prime Minister to answer the question the way that was, the last part of that question was worded. And I'm in some difficulty here because I don't want to... I'm prepared to give the Honourable Leader of the Opposition a third go at this, but because I don't want to lose a supplementary. But the Prime Minister clearly is not answerable for how someone, and I'm on my feet, how someone outside of this place might feel about something. Unless it
Mr. Speaker,
the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, has the Prime Minister seen reports about the distress suffered by the mother of the dead child whose identity was stolen? And does he think, is he prepared to relieve that distress by holding the person accountable who covered up the theft of that child's identity?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yes, I've seen reports. That's why I think the behaviour of Mr. Garrett was unacceptable, and why I believed... let me finish.
Order.
And that is why I believed it's wholly appropriate that Mr. Garrett should resign from Parliament. To the latter point, I am not responsible for who political parties select as their candidates, but I'd simply make this one point. The Cabinet Manual quite clearly says in all these roles and at all times, ministers are expected to act lawfully. And I would make the point, Mr. Speaker, that this matter was covered by a suppression order.
Point of order, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I seek leave to table the relevant part of the Cabinet Manual because it not only requires the Prime Minister to be accountable for lawful behaviour, but also the higher ethical standards. He left that part out.
Order. The Minister, the member can't add that last bit. Leave has been sought to table part of the Cabinet Manual. I accept that it's not readily available to all members. Is there any objection to that? There is no objection. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, supplementary question.
Supplementary question. When he said yesterday that Mr. Hyde had complied in every respect with the high standards that he had set, was he confusing high standards with double standards?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no. And what I can say about Mr. Hyde is, as a minister, he's conducted his affairs and his portfolio to a high standard. And in all of my dealings with him as a minister, he has been honest and trustworthy with me.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister says that he's conducted his ministerial capacities to a high standard. Does he also agree that he has conducted his personal and his political capacities to that same high standard for which the Prime Minister is also accountable?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Hyde has carried out his affairs in a personal and private capacity to a high ethical standard. But I am not responsible for who he might hire as an MP.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister accept that he's the only person in the country that believes what he's just said?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Question number 4, Aaron. I beg your pardon. Is this a point of order or a supplementary question? I beg your pardon. The Honourable Rodney Hyde.
To the Prime Minister, if I may.
Order. I've called the Honourable Rodney Hyde.
Would the Prime Minister consider it acceptable, in his interpretation as Prime Minister of the Cabinet Manual, for a minister to sign a painting that they hadn't painted, and then to arrange to have the evidence of that painting destroyed before it could be investigated?
Point of order, the Honourable Darren Hughes. Order, I say to both sides of the House. This carry on during a point of order will cease immediately. A fair question was asked. A point of order has been called. I want to hear what this point of order is about. The Honourable Darren Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my point of order is that the question that's been asked by Rodney Hyde is not only hypothetical, but about a third person who's not in Parliament. You previously ruled that there cannot be questions to the Prime Minister.
Order. The members jump to conclusions. I never heard any member named, any person named. It was hypothetical indeed, and hypothetical questions are allowed. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, no, I wouldn't think that would meet the standards of the Cabinet Manual. And I think that raises a very interesting point about when a member